Today I'm going to show you how I use a fisheye lens to create a really unexpected and super exciting fashion shoot. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here, and if you're like me, you've never shot with a fisheye lens before. It just didn't seem like a tool that I needed to use until I had a fashion client recently ask me to shoot a campaign for them using a fisheye lens. So what I had to do is I had to get one, I had to practice, I had to experiment, and now what I'm doing is I'm passing all of that knowledge and experience on to you guys. I used to think that a fisheye lens was really gimmicky, maybe not a very commonly used tool, but if you look back in pop culture, it's been used for decades and decades. So for example, in the 60s, it gave you a psychedelic look. In the 1990s, it was used in a ton of hip hop music videos. And in the last few years, it's been having a resurgence. I see it in fashion editorials and in album covers. And in fact, there's a favorite photographer of mine who uses it all the time, Tim Walker. If you don't know him, search Tim Walker Fisheye, and you'll see so many creative shoots. And so because it's having a resurgence, and because I had a commercial client ask me to shoot it, well, what I want to do is I want to show you some of the challenges that you may run into when making a really impactful shoot, especially in the studio. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, what is a fisheye lens? I think that's where we should begin. Fundamentally, a fisheye lens is a lens that gives you an extremely wide field of view. In fact, the lens that I'm shooting with today is a Canon EF 8 to 15 millimeter 4.0 lens. It's 8 millimeters. And at 8 millimeters, if I'm looking at you here and I take a picture, guess what? I can see the wall to the left and the right, the floor and the ceiling. I see everything in a 180-degree view. Now at 8 millimeters, when I take a shot, it actually shows up like a sphere, like a circle. And so you're not getting the normal rectangular frame, it's actually a circle when you take the picture. But if I zoom in more towards 15 millimeters, it fills out, but it still gives you that extreme creative distortion. Now this all sounds weird, so I think the best way to demonstrate what I'm talking about is actually to show you on a subject. So, Coco, can I have you come out here for me? All right, so I'm going to start off and show you what this image looks like at 8 millimeters. Okay, perfect, just like that, and just keep your hand on the hip and hold that pose for me. Okay, so you see my entire studio, the floor, the ceiling, the walls to the side. It includes everything. Now, if you're out on location, you can use this to your advantage. Maybe you're shooting the subject against the sky, or maybe in a cityscape where the buildings seem to morph around them, or maybe it's several people and they're kind of all leaning in and the environment is part of the concept. But in the studio, this is going to create some challenges. And so I'm going to be working through that and showing you some of the pros and cons and some of the different approaches you can take. Okay, so that's at 8 millimeters. Let me show you what it looks like at 15. So this is still a massive field of view, but not quite as distorted. And you'll notice that the spherical nature of the image, it disappeared, right? It's no longer going to be a circle. All right, so one of the benefits of shooting with a fisheye lens is the distortion. But as you can see in this shot, it's not really bending or emphasizing anything. And so what you need to use is your distance to the subject. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move closer to my subject. What I need to keep in mind is that whatever is closest to camera will look largest. This is true normally when you're posing a subject, like if they pop their hip towards your camera, the hip will look larger. If they pop the hip away, it'll look smaller. But when you have a fisheye lens, this is exponentially more exaggerated. So I'm going to pop in and I'm going to start just by changing my camera angle so you can see whatever's closest to the camera is what looks largest. All right, so just stay right there, hand on the hip, everything like that. So right now I'm closest to her midsection and her head, and you'll notice her feet are tiny. And now I'm going to be much closer to her feet, and you'll notice that her feet look much larger and her legs look really exaggerated. So you can see that whatever is closest to the camera looks largest. And this can be achieved both by the subject's pose as well as your camera angle. But this is so exaggerated, and this is where your challenge is going to be, is how do you make this look interesting and how do you make this look good? So I actually developed the concept for this shoot around the fact that we were using a fisheye lens. I wanted my subject to wear really interesting shoes because I knew that what I could do is shoot really wide, get really low, and make the shoes the focal point of the shot. Really long legs, bright red shoes, like interesting angles, and so that's my plan. But as you look at these shots, you realize that there is another problem. Because we're shooting in the studio, right now, if I get low, I basically have most of her body off of the background and all I see is the ceiling above her. So what you could do is you could fix it in Photoshop. Like that is an option. So what I could do in the example here, shooting on a white background, is I could select her, paint the background white, not super difficult, and no longer would I be seeing the entire environment. Again, if you want to see the environment, maybe you go on location. But there are a couple ways that we can work around this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually ask my subject to step closer to the background. The further she is towards the background, the more I'll be able to fit her on it. As a note, in this particular instance, I'm not using my usual background. Usually I'm using a Savage Universal 9-foot. In this case, I'm using a 12-foot background because I knew I'd be using a wide-angle lens that I would need to have a little bit more real estate to work with. So it is definitely a challenge. When I've seen a fisheye lens used in the studio in the past, they actually shoot on something called a cyc wall. A cyc wall is a curved surface. Usually it's white. And there are special cyc walls that curve on the floor, the ceiling, and both of the walls on the side. So basically you're in a massive white void, and then you would never need to worry about the studio showing up in the photograph. But we're going to work with this 12-foot seamless. And so Coco, can you take a couple steps back as close to the background as you can? Wonderful. So I'm going to get a shot nice and low from several feet away. She easily fits on the background, no problem. Watch what happens when I get closer. And now take your foot and put it right here. Yeah, perfect. Great. So let's take a look at what happened there. All right, so here's what we have going on. In the first shot, when I had her back all the way up to the background, she easily fits, and I'm several feet away from her. You'll notice that there is a bit of distortion, but she's actually really tiny in the frame, even though I am zooming in to 15 millimeters. She's very small. Now I can crop in and fill the frame with her body. However, it's not doing that cool distortion, funky fisheye effect that I want. So what I did is I moved in much closer to her. Whatever is closest to the camera is going to be largest, and I'm exaggerating that even more by coming even closer to her and using a fisheye lens and being at a low angle, so her foot looks really large. And then I have her pull her foot out and put it closer to me, making it appear even larger, exaggerating it so that it's almost cartoonish. All right, so this last shot where she's up against the background, I'm really low, she puts her foot out towards me, that's what I'm going for. That's that really graphic, fun, edgy, exaggerated, distorted look that I'm going for in a fisheye fashion shoot. So now it's all about getting the pose right. And so let's actually work that pose and get the shot. The shots that I just created are completely different than anything I have ever captured before, but they're still in my style. They're still clean, bold, and graphic, but they're a little bit unexpected, and they're stylistically on trend, which I love. Now, what I've learned from this shoot and the other time that I have used a fisheye lens is that it's not easy. There are so many different variables to consider. So for example, the subject's distance from the background, my height, the subject's pose, the focal length that I choose, how close I get to my subject's pose. All of these things together create very different results. And so in some of the shots, I have really, really exaggerated results where the top of her body and her head look tiny and the feet look huge. And then in some other results, it's a little bit more subtle and the perspective is not quite as exaggerated. And neither one is better than the other, it's just a different approach. So if you want to try a fisheye and you want to experiment with this, I've actually put the links to my gear in the description below. And of course, if you want to check it out, you need to visit adorama.com. Be sure to subscribe because I have a lot more videos like these coming your way, and pop over to my website, learnwithlindsay.com, for a lot more of my own tutorials. See you next time, guys.